So, as usual, we'll begin with the prayers and then some meditation. And I thought that we could try doing meditation like I read last week, His Holiness's explanation of how to recognize the conventional nature of the mind. So I thought we could give that a try without any expectations. Lama Yeshe always said to us, when you're doing meditation, don't have any expectations. So that's a killer. So it's good to just go in with a very open mind, a beginner's mind, and be ready for whatever occurs. Okay, so then during the recitation of the prayers, it's good if you can to imagine the Buddha in the space in front. It's also important to be as relaxed as possible, to have your body and mind free of tension, tightness, stress. So any of those kind of things that may be there in your body or mind, let them go, let them melt and flow away and disappear. And try to really feel that you are sitting in the presence of the Buddha. Try to feel his incredible qualities of infinite, unconditional love and compassion for you and for every other living being in the universe. So in the Buddha's mind, there's not the slightest aversion, judgmentalness, criticalness, disgust. No such feelings exist, no matter what anybody does. The Buddha is always forgiving and loving and caring and never gives up on anybody, no matter what they do, no matter what they're like. And he has incredible wisdom, knowing the true nature of all things. His mind sees all ultimate truths, emptinesses of inherent existence, and all conventional truths, all things that exist conventionally. He sees all of these things every moment. His mind is like totally open, aware of everything, and without the slightest mistake or misconception or wrong way of seeing things. He sees everything just as it is, perfectly clearly. And he has incredible skill knowing how to help each and every sentient being. What's the best way of teaching and guiding each sentient being to become out, to emerge from suffering and the causes of suffering, and to reach complete liberation and full enlightenment. And he's completely dedicated to doing that. He'll never give up on anybody, no matter how long it takes to guide each being to enlightenment. He has infinite patience to be able to do that. So feel that you can trust the Buddha. He's someone you can completely trust and rely on. And if you can, while reciting the prayers, imagine all other sentient beings around. We can't actually see them all, but it's nice to wish that they could be there doing the prayers, doing the practices along with us, getting the benefit of these practices at the same time as we are. Okay, so we'll start with prayer of refuge and bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryataya. So now let's recite the mantra of the Buddha 7 times. And while reciting it, imagine light and nectar flowing from the Buddha into yourself and at the same time into all other sentient beings around you. And our bodies and minds get filled with the light, and it's the Buddha's qualities and realizations in the form of light. So as we are filled with this light, it purifies our negative karma and our delusions, afflictive emotions, especially ignorance about the true nature of things. So all the causes of suffering and all suffering are eliminated, become non-existent. And the light nourishes our positive potential, the good qualities we have in our mind, like compassion, love, wisdom, and so on, so that they can increase and grow and bring us closer to the state of enlightenment. Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Manaye Soha. 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 So now let's spend a few minutes doing meditation on the breathing, just being aware of the breath coming in and going out. So by doing this, really try your best to let go of thoughts of the past, thoughts of the future, things you have to do in the future, later today, tonight, tomorrow, next week, and thoughts of other places and people and problems. So try to let go of all of these thoughts, even if they pop up in your mind involuntarily. Just notice them and let them go. Don't give them attention, get caught up in them. Just let them go and return to the breathing. And also try your best not to be distracted by sense objects, like things you hear or smell or taste or other sensations in your body except those related to the breathing. So really try to keep your mind focused on the breath and bring your mind to a state that is more calm and clear in the present, right here, right now. So His Holiness says that our mind is usually invaded by lots of different thoughts, some constructive, some destructive, about external objects and people, things we've perceived, things we've experienced. So all these thoughts cloud the clear and cognizant nature of the mind, preventing us from perceiving it. When the flow of thoughts slows down, it is possible to see into the depths of the mind, its clear and cognizant nature that is like a still pool of water. So one way we can get a glimpse of the clear and cognizant nature of the mind is to stop the mind from arising in the aspect of all those objects, stop all conceptual thoughts about the past and the future, not let the mind be disturbed by sensory objects like sounds and so on. And then he says, if we continue to meditate in this way, you will gradually be able to keep the mind at a distance from sense objects, and the barrage of thoughts will diminish and eventually cease. By the mind not arising in the aspect of those objects, the clear nature of mind will become apparent. When you experience your mind in the absence of thoughts about the past and the future, you will have a sense of vacuity, which is the gap between the mind and those objects. This vacuity is not the ultimate nature of mind, the mind's emptiness of inherent existence, nor is it nothingness, as in blank-minded meditation. Once you experience that vacuous state of mind, try to meditate or remain in it. Or just spend a few minutes trying to understand what His Holiness is saying here. Really try not to let your mind get caught up in thoughts or pay attention to sensory objects. Just really try to keep your mind in the present and focused on the mind's own nature, the clear and cognizant, clear and knowing nature of the mind. See if you can get a glimpse of that gap or vacuity that the Dalai Lama is describing. And then His Holiness goes on to say that if we're able to get a glimpse of this clear and cognizant nature of the mind and try to prolong that experience, remain in that experience. And then he says, eventually you will have a feeling that the mind is something like a mirror with infinite dimensions. At that time, the nature of the mind itself is clear. Yet, whenever the mind contacts an object, a reflection immediately arises. In this way, understand the mirror-like clarity of the mind. The mind remains clear by nature, even though reflections of phenomena may appear in it. So don't worry if you had difficulty understanding that, or even getting any kind of experience of that. I think it is quite difficult to do, and probably best to have an experienced teacher to go to. check your experiences to make sure you're on the right track. And last week, Venerable Lamsel asked, how do you tell if you're really meditating on the clear nature of the mind or doing blank-minded meditation? And I'm not sure, but thinking about that, I thought that maybe when you're doing, what His Holiness calls blank-minded meditation, you don't actually have a definite object. Your mind is just kind of spaced out, but you're not really focused on anything definite. Whereas here in this practice that His Holiness describes, there is a definite object, which is the mind, the nature of the mind. So you're trying to focus on that and get an experience of that. And the Dalai Lama advises that we stop thoughts about the past and the future. So we shouldn't be thinking about the past and the future when we're doing this meditation, but we're still trying to keep the mind in the present and focus on the nature of the mind, the subject, that which is experiencing. Focus on that and get a glimpse of that. So there is an object. And and I thought maybe initially we might need to use some conceptual thoughts, like, thinking about what His Holiness said and the various analogies that he made, like a mirror, still pool in the forest, and so on. So we might have to think about those conceptually to get an understanding, but probably later with more experience, you can experience directly the nature of the mind. I'm not sure because I don't have this experience myself, so I'm just guessing, but something to look into more, something to explore more. So to continue, last week we started looking at the third type of establishment of mindfulness. No, sorry, the fourth one, the last one, mindfulness of phenomena. So we finished the third one, mindfulness of mind, and moved on to mindfulness of phenomena. And in the Pali tradition and Theravada tradition, which is based on the actual sutra in which the Buddha explained the establishments of mindfulness, there are 5 sets or 5 groups of phenomena. And the first of those 5 groups are the 5 hindrances. So these 5 hindrances are all mental factors that hinder our attainment of concentration. And since concentration is something very, very important, it's absolutely essential if we want to attain realizations, especially the realization of emptiness, which is like the weapon that annihilates all the obscurations of the mind that prevent liberation, prevent enlightenment. So we need concentration to be able to generate that kind of wisdom. And so we need to recognize and learn how to deal with the hindrances that prevent us from having good concentration. And so that's why it's important to go through these 5 hindrances and recognize them. Paola, could we have the slides on the screen? So last week we looked at the first of the 5 hindrances, which is sensual desire. That's being attracted to, attached to objects of the senses. And I think we're very familiar with that. We have plenty of experience of that. And so that can be a hindrance in our practice of meditation. So we need to be able to recognize it when it's happening and then apply antidotes to it. So contemplating impermanence is a very helpful antidote. And also shortcomings of sense objects, just recognizing that they're not really satisfying, they don't really bring long-term happiness or satisfaction, and getting attached to them just leads to problems. This afternoon I was taking a walk in the woods, and earlier we had rain. Actually it was snow, but it melted as soon as it hit the ground, so there was a lot of moisture on the ground. And at one point I saw this really beautiful red leaf decorated with drops of water, like dewdrops. They were kind of all sparkly, and I thought, yeah, somebody might see dewdrops or raindrops like that and think, oh, they're so beautiful, they look like diamonds, I want to take them home and put them in a special place, and then I can look at them and enjoy them again and again and again. Maybe a child would think that way. As adults, maybe we tried that when we were a child and realized that doesn't work. You can't hang on to dewdrops. They're very ephemeral, very transitory. They quickly disappear. But yeah, if you did try to do that, take them home. First, it'd be hard to even get them home. They'd probably fall off the leaf on the way home. But even if you did manage to get them home and put them in some kind of container, the next day they're probably gone. They're not there anymore. So sense objects are like that. they may appear very beautiful, very attractive, and we get very excited about them, experience a lot of pleasure with them, and want to hang on to them, want to hang on to the pleasure that we get from them. But it doesn't work. They're simply incapable of giving us long-term, genuine satisfaction. For one thing, they don't last long, even if they last longer than dewdrops, but eventually they fall apart. They're just not there anymore. And even if they do last long, we have the tendency to become dissatisfied with them. We enjoy them for a while, but then we get bored with them. They no longer satisfy us, and then we're looking for something else, grasping for something else. So that's why the Buddha said something like, following thoughts of desire is like drinking salt water. Instead of getting satisfied, having your thirst satisfied, you just become more thirsty. So you just have more and more desire, more and more longing, and never really find satisfaction. So yeah, we need to really contemplate. We have plenty of experiences ourselves, and we can also look at the world around us, the experiences of other people, to see the truth of this, that sense objects are not able to really satisfy us, and they just lead to more dissatisfaction and more suffering. So understanding that clearly will help us to let go of any attraction, any attachment to sense objects. Number 2 is malice or ill will. And this is related to anger and hatred. It could involve actually having thoughts of wanting to harm somebody or wishing that they meet with harm. That's kind of an extreme form of this mental state. And it could happen in meditation. Maybe it's happened to you while you're meditating. You might remember somebody doing something to you or doing something to others that you care about. And your mind can get all worked up, feeling angry and even daydreaming about doing something, saying something to get back at that person, or just wishing that harm would come to them. So I think it's clear that that is an interference to meditation, to concentration, and it's also quite negative. Your mind gets into a very, very negative state. So I've had a lot of experience of this in with regard to noise. I get very bothered by noise. So if there's noise happening while I'm meditating, I can get quite unhappy, even angry about it. And I noticed in the past, I would even feel kind of justified in feeling that way, because I thought, here I am, I'm trying to practice Dharma, I'm trying to meditate, and they're making that noise and it's disturbing me. They shouldn't do that. And, yeah. So I definitely know this state of mind. I'm really still trying to work on it, but it's definitely a hindrance to meditation. And I was listening to some teachings that Ajahn Brahm gave during a meditation retreat, and he explained this particular hindrance as the fault-finding mind. In other words, a mind that finds fault with some person or some being or some object, even your meditation cushion. It's not very comfortable, it's lumpy, it's too hard, it's too soft, it's too this, too that. Or finding fault with yourself, anything. And I found that really, really helpful. It's kind of a more subtle version of malice. It's not like full blown, I want to hurt somebody, but it's just, I don't like that. That's annoying, that's disturbing. And so that really helped me to see how much of this I do have in my mind, and also how it's a hindrance. It really is an obstacle, because your mind gets all caught up in that, and then you start thinking, how can I change this? How can I make things better? then I'll be able to, if I had a different cushion, then I could meditate better and I have better concentration. So your mind can get all caught up in those kinds of thoughts and you're not concentrating. And also with this state of mind, there's usually exaggeration involved. As we know with anger, when we're angry at somebody, our mind tends to project things that may not be there or exaggerate things that are there. So it kind of paints a picture of the object as much worse than it really is. And then, that feeds our feelings of anger, like feeling justified in disliking that person, being angry at that person because they're so this and they're so that, and so on and so forth. So there's lots of antidotes. I just put a couple here, but you've probably heard many times different antidotes for anger. So just some examples are the faults of anger, just recognizing that that state of mind is so disturbing, is so negative, and also so unrealistic. I find that really helpful just to see how I'm not thinking in a realistic way or in a helpful way, a healthy way. It's a faulty mind rather than a positive, pure mind. And then loving kindness, if you can. See the person, the object, with compassion, with loving kindness. One way of doing that is reminding yourself of good qualities of the person, good things that they've done. See them as a good person, not a bad person. See them as likable, not dislikable. So those are just a few things, but there's many others as well. We do need to apply antidotes. I mean, sometimes if it's just a very mild, low level feeling of irritation, you might be able to just notice it and let it go and not have to do other antidotes. Just, oh, that's anger, that's irritation. Let it go and go back to your object. But if it doesn't go away, you may need to apply something stronger medicine. So the next one is 2 in 1, lethargy and sleepiness. Sometimes they're called sloth and torpor. So lethargy can be experienced both physically and mentally. So physically, it's a lack of energy and stamina, just feeling kind of blah. And if it's mental lethargy, it's a kind of heaviness. The mind is dull, unclear, lacking in energy. So we probably have this kind of feeling after eating a big meal, especially if it's a hot day. So the heat and the food in the stomach, and maybe you've been working, you're tired. So those factors, those conditions can lead to this kind of feeling. And then we may feel bored and don't really want to exert ourselves in doing anything constructive. So that's lethargy. And then sleepiness, we know as well. That's when it's kind of a continuation of lethargy. If lethargy gets worse, it could turn into sleepiness, drowsiness, where you're actually kind of nodding off. So we need to notice if either or both of these are present and do something about them. So antidotes are to energize yourself. For example, if you're still sitting in meditation, sit up straight. Maybe your body was slouching, so it's good to sit up straight and open your eyes wider than they were. Have some light coming in. They also say it's good to meditate on light. So to imagine, visualize yourself filled with light and the environment around you filled with light. It's like when we turn the light on in the morning, it wakes us up. So imagining light can get us out of this lethargic state. Another recommendation is to contemplate uplifting topics like our precious human life, how fortunate we are to have this life that we have with all the conditions that we have, and how it's not going to last, so we better make good use of it while we have it. Or qualities of the Buddha, something that will raise our mind, raise our energy, give us energy. So those are some things you can do while you're still sitting on your meditation seat, without having to leave your meditation. But if they don't work and you're still feeling heavy, lethargic, sleepy, then you could take a break from your meditation. Although if you're meditating in a group, that may not be appropriate, everybody getting up and walking around. But if you're on your own, you could do that. You could go outside, get some fresh air. It's also good to look out over a long view, look out in the distance, splash your face with cold water, doing some walking. That's why in some countries they alternate sitting meditation and walking meditation. You have more energy when you're walking. And it's also recommended not to eat too much, not to overeat if you can. So eat lighter meals, and also leave a space. Don't try to meditate right after a meal. Leave at least an hour before trying to meditate. So then the fourth one is also 2-in-1, restlessness and regret. Regret is sometimes called worry. They're put together because they both cause the mind to be uneasy, not peaceful. And restlessness could be physical, like you just feel this restless energy in your body and it's hard to sit still. It could also be mental. Your mind is kind of hyperactive and jumping from one thing to another. Can't stay focused on one thing for more than a few seconds. And then regret, one way of explaining it is when you think about things from the past that you may have done, mistakes that you've made, bad things you've done, and then you feel bad about those things. Bad about things you did but you shouldn't have done, or things that you should have done but you didn't do. Okay. So if that arises in our mind during meditation, then our mind is disturbed, not calm and peaceful, so it's hard to concentrate. So again, we need to notice them when they're happening, be able to identify them, and how they are a hindrance to meditation. So antidotes, focusing on the breathing is helpful. That's a really good method to calm the mind down. And then with regret, if you really did do something to regret, if you remember harming somebody or breaking a precept or whatever, something that really should be purified, it's actually good to feel that kind of regret, but not to keep thinking about it again and again and again and worrying about it. Instead, do purification practice. If you feel this, urgent need to do the purification practice right away, you could do that. Otherwise, you could say later, after my meditation session, I'll purify that. But doing purification with the 4 powers is a way of dealing with regret over negative things that we've done in the past. And that way you can just, okay, I've purified that, and then let it go. Don't keep thinking about it, beating yourself up about it, and so on. So it's helpful to remember that the past is over. It's not existing anymore. And we can't go back and change the past. It's not possible to do that. So to continue thinking about and worrying about the past and things we've done in the past is quite useless. Purification is useful, but to just, dwell on the past isn't useful. And instead, it's better to look forward and think, okay, from now on, I will not do that kind of thing again. I will really try my best to do things in a different way. So look forward, like from this moment on, I'm going to be a different person. I'm going to do things differently. So it's better to let go of the past. Other things that could be helpful would be impermanence, just meditating on impermanence, reminding yourself how things are not fixed and permanent, they're changing all the time. And in Bhante Gunaratana's book, he said it's good to develop confidence in the Buddha and his teachings, that the Buddha explained a path that many, many people have already followed and were able to overcome their hindrances and free themselves from suffering. So contemplating that can give us confidence in the Buddha and in the path and the practice that we're doing, and focus more on that rather than on mistakes that we've made in the past and so on. The last, it says number 6. It should be number 5. I don't know what happened there. Okay, number 5 is deluded doubt. And so doubt itself isn't necessarily negative. The Buddha encouraged us to investigate and not just blindly believe what he taught. And the Dalai Lama also really encourages that. We investigate things. It's good to have doubts, good to ask questions. But deluded doubt is when our doubt gets to the point where we're kind of stuck and leaning in a direction that isn't helpful for our Dharma practice. So for example, if we're having thoughts like, is there really such a thing as enlightenment? You know, a lot of people don't believe in enlightenment. They say it's just like a fairy tale, a myth. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm just wasting my time. I'm trying to reach enlightenment. So we're having those kind of thoughts coming up, and we're kind of leaning in that direction, going in that direction. That's deluded doubt. Because if we're not careful, that kind of doubt can take us further and turn into wrong conception. A wrong conception or wrong view would be thinking, oh, there's no such thing as enlightenment. It's just a lot of rubbish. It's just a fairy tale. I don't believe it. So that's wrong view, when we totally deny the existence of something that does exist and is important for our spiritual practice, our spiritual development. So doubt is kind of going in that direction. And if we're not careful, it could lead to that kind of wrong conclusion. And then we would not have any more energy to practice. Even with doubt, even doubt can make us kind of immobilized or paralyzed. It's like, well, maybe I'm wasting my time sitting here doing all these prayers and keeping all these precepts, and you know, it's all just a waste of time. I should go and get a job and make some money and do something with my life. So it can really cause us to lose energy in our practice. So look out for that if that's happening, and if it is happening, there's some things you can do about it. One is, again, remember impermanence. The way that can help is that doubt is impermanence. Everything is impermanent, and that includes these thoughts, these doubtful thoughts. So you could even think yourself, do I always have this kind of doubt? Is it a permanent part of my mind? And you probably recognize, no, there are times when I don't have this kind of doubt, and I feel very confident and very happy about practicing Dharma and working for enlightenment. So to just see that it's a temporary thing, not a permanent thing, it's something that comes and goes. And it's just a mental factor. It's not who you are. It's just a mental state that arises because of causes and conditions. So try not to see it as permanent and try not to identify with it. And the other antidotes are to contemplate the qualities of the Buddha and his teachings, focus on what is beneficial, what is harmful, what kind of states of mind and actions lead to happiness and benefit, and which ones lead to suffering and misfortune and so on. So just have a clear understanding of those things. And also check with a teacher. If you have difficulty resolving your doubts on your own, talk to a teacher or senior students. That can be very helpful. Because sometimes your mind just keeps going around in circles. And it's hard to get out of those ways of thinking. And also study Dharma. That's my experience. I found that the more I have studied, the more I have learned about the Buddha's teachings, the fewer doubts I have, the more conviction I have. So many things make sense and fit together, and it's all very beautiful and inspiring. And mindfulness of the breathing is helpful too, just to calm the mind down and not let the mind get stuck in those patterns of thinking. And also just to know it's not a bad thing to have doubts. It's okay to have doubts when following the path. And it's even encouraged that we investigate and check things for ourselves. So, if we do have doubts coming up, it doesn't help to feel ashamed and beat ourselves up and mentally compare ourselves with others and think, oh, that person over there, they look like they don't have any doubts at all. They're just 100% full of faith and confidence. And, oh, what's wrong with me? I'm so bad. So that's not at all helpful. Yeah, sometimes I was just talking about this the other day with Venerable children. In our experience, we have seen certain people who look like they were super enthusiastic, just full of faith and devotion and really gung-ho, and then they disappear. They disrobe and disappear, and you never hear from them again. So I've definitely seen that. And so so it's okay to have doubts as long as you explore your doubts. Try not to get stuck in them. Explore them, investigate, learn more, talk to people, talk to teachers. And in fact, having doubts can be a really wonderful way of learning. If you investigate your doubts, explore your doubts, learn more, you'll probably come out with more knowledge and more conviction than you had before. So anyway, these are the 5 hindrances that the Buddha pointed out as the main obstacles to the development of concentration. So we do need to be aware of them, look out for them when they happen to us, and know how to deal with them. So the next slide, the Buddha gave some similes to each of these 5 hindrances, using the analogy of water. Like if you have a bowl of water and you want to use the water in the bowl as a mirror. Maybe you're in a place where there's no mirror and you have to look at your face and to check something in your face, so you can see a reflection of your face in this bowl of water. But if there's if there's something wrong with the water, then you won't be able to see a clear reflection. And so in that analogy, then the Buddha explained these 5 similes, and these 5 hindrances and how they affect our mind. Our mind is like the bowl of water, and it can be affected adversely by these hindrances. So he said the first one, sensual desire, is like water mixed with dye. So if dye or food coloring is put in the water is no longer its natural clear color. And if you're trying to see your reflection in the water, then it's going to look really strange. You might look green or red or something. So it doesn't give you a clear and accurate reflection of your face. So in a similar way, desire, sensual desire, colors our perception of things. We don't see things accurately when we have desire, when we have attachment. It distorts our perception of things. It usually exaggerates our perception of things. And sooner or later, we're going to see the object as it really is, and then we may feel disappointment. We may even feel angry because it wasn't what we thought it was. And then the second malice or aversion is like boiling water. So if the water in the bowl is boiling, then it's very turbulent and you won't be able to see a clear reflection of your face. And so in a similar way, when anger is in our mind is boiling. It's not calm and peaceful, and we are not able to see things clearly with an angry mind. We don't see things clearly and accurately. It also distorts our perception of things. And the third, lethargy and sleepiness, he said it's like water filled with algae. Yuck. So again, if we try to look at our reflection in a bowl of water that's filled with algae, we won't be able to get a clear and accurate reflection. And then restlessness and regret or worry are like water stirred by wind. So when the water is choppy, agitated by air, by wind, then again, the reflection will be able to appear clearly. So when our mind is disturbed by restlessness and regret, then it's unstable, agitated, not clear, not calm, not able to really focus and concentrate. And then deluded doubt, the fifth one, he said, is like dark, muddy water. So again, if there's a lot of mud in the water, then you won't be able to have a clear and accurate reflection of your face. And similarly, deluded doubt, if that is in the mind, then the mind is unclear, not clear. And then, so I got this from the book by Bhikkhu Analayo, Direct Path to Realization. Anyway, it's a really excellent book he wrote about the Satipatthana Sutra. And he said that the Buddha gave another set of similes that illustrates the absence of the hindrances. So I'll just read those. I didn't put them on the slide, but so first of all, being free from sensual desire is like being relieved from a debt. So if we're in debt, if we have a debt, we owe a lot of money to somebody or some organization, then you don't feel completely comfortable as long as you're in that situation. But if you're relieved of the debt or you pay back the debt, you no longer have that hanging over you, then it's a feeling of relief, freedom. Secondly, being free of malice and aversion is like recovering from physical sickness. So we probably all had that experience of being really ill and very uncomfortable, maybe pain, and no energy and not being able to do the things we want to do. So having gone through that experience and then recovering from that, getting your energy back, feeling well again, then it's a very wonderful experience. So being free of malice and aversion is like that. And then third, being free of lethargy and sleepiness, not having those obstructions in our mind is like being released from prison. That's pretty strong. I don't know, probably most people haven't been in prison, but maybe you can imagine what it's like, or if you've communicated with inmates and they describe what it's like, you get some sense of that. So having been in that situation of being imprisoned, not having freedom, and then being free, being out and able to go where you want and do what you want is incredibly wonderful. And then fourth, Buddha said, being free of restlessness and regret is like being liberated from slavery. That's pretty strong too, maybe even stronger than imprisonment. So again, most of us probably haven't been in that situation of being enslaved, but we can imagine. We've read stories and watched films and so on about slaves, and yeah, can imagine how horrible that would be. So having had that experience and then being free of it is similar to being free of restlessness and regret. The last one, the Buddha said, overcoming doubt is like crossing a dangerous desert safely. So if you have to travel through an area that is dangerous, maybe there's dangers from the elements, from bandits or whatever, and you manage to get through that situation without encountering any dangers and still being alive and healthy, you probably feel a great sense of relief. So to be able to have those experiences of being free of these 5 hindrances, we need to be familiar with them, know their faults, how they're faulty, how they interfere with our meditation practice, and in that way they interfere with our spiritual progress on the path, attaining the higher states of mind that we have the ability to attain, but these hinder us from that. And then learning the antidotes and applying the antidotes when these states of mind, these mental factors arise in us. The next slide. So the Satipatthana Sutra explains 4 steps in dealing with the 5 hindrances. So this came up in a question last week because some of these mental factors are also mentioned in, for example, mindfulness of the mind. There one is supposed to recognize the mind with desire and mind without desire. But here in the 4th establishment of mindfulness, mindfulness of phenomena, Buddha talks about not just recognizing these states of mind, but also knowing their causes and so forth. So there's these 4 steps that we need to go through with regard to the 5 hindrances. So the first one is know when it's present and know when it's not. So we need to be able to know when there's sensual desire in our mind, and also know when it's absent, when it's not there. And same with malice and so forth. And then the second step is knowing the causes that give rise to it. So, we recognize sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. So how come it's there? it's an impermanent phenomena, a conditioned phenomena. That means it arises from causes and conditions. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. So what are the causes and conditions giving rise to that particular hindrance? So, for example, the first one, sensual desire, the main reason that arises is because of habit. We have the habit of being attracted to and getting attached to pleasant sense objects. So this has been in our mind from beginningless time. It didn't just suddenly start happening in our mind, but from time without beginning, there's been attachment in our mind. It's also based on ignorance that sees things as inherently existing, seeing ourselves as inherently existing. There's a real I here, and I want to be happy, I want to feel good, and we're very attached to ourselves. We have self-centeredness. So anytime we perceive, encounter people or objects that do give us a pleasant feeling, then I want that. I want to feel good. That makes me feel good. Therefore, I want to have that. So this is a pattern that has been happening in our experience from beginningless time. So we already came into this life with the tendency to behave in that way. And then also our society and culture encourage us to have a touch. It's good for the economy. I remember after 9/11, when 9/11 happened, and a lot of people stopped traveling and going out and going to, malls and so on, and the economy suffered. And I think when George Bush, was kind of pushing people to go out and go shopping, go traveling, and I thought, oh yeah, all for money. So yeah, so our society, and it's not just Western society, I mean, it's everywhere. Most places in the world have some kind of push on people to have desire, have attachment. So we're very much encouraged by others, even starting from childhood, little kids, small children, the TV programs we watch, and now with the internet and so on and so forth, there's just all these advertisements, mesmerizing us, getting us to desire that object so that we'll buy it, or mommy will buy it for us. So there's lots of factors that feed this tendency, this habit of having desire. And in normal society, there isn't much encouragement to counteract desire. It's only in religious and spiritual traditions that there's any kind of information like that of, reduce your desire. I remember in one of Daniel Goleman's books, I think it was Emotional Intelligence, and he talked about research that had been done on various destructive emotions or disturbing emotions like anger and fear and so on. But he said there's been no research on desire or attachment because it's regarded as a social norm rather than a destructive emotion. And there's people who even think, oh, but you need desire, you need attachment. You can't be happy without it. You can't have good relationships without it. So it's kind of more difficult to have even the interest in working on attachment compared with some of the other emotions like anger, which there's a lot of evidence on how destructive and harmful that is. So anyway, there's lots of causes and conditions as to why we have desire arising in our mind. So understanding the causes is helpful, because then we can have more choice or more control over putting ourselves in situations. Like, it's just better not to go to shopping malls. It's better not to watch certain TV programs or go to certain internet sites and so on and so forth. Because there you're going to have more of it's going to be in your face. And that, plus our habitual tendencies, seeds in our mind of having followed thoughts of desire in the past, and that's just, setting ourselves up for having desire. But there's still ways we can work on it, like developing mindfulness. And even if we do have to go to a store or a mall, then just being very, very mindful, knowing I have to go, I have to get this object, go and get it, pay for it, leave, and that's it. So there are ways we can manage the causes and conditions to reduce the likelihood of desire arising in our mind. And then the third step is to understand how to temporarily suppress its manifest forms. So what that means is to completely get rid of desire. That's step number 4. We need the direct realization of emptiness. And that's a pretty high level of realization. So it's not something that's probably will happen anytime soon. So in the meantime, there are things we can do to kind of suppress it temporarily, so that it's not just going crazy in our mind. And so that is to learn the various antidotes, what antidotes we can use when desire does arise in our mind, or when we are in a situation where desire could arise. So what can we do? What are things we could do to manage it? And then 4th is to eliminate completely. That requires the realization of emptiness. And so if you can see the faults of desire and the other hindrances, if you can see these are really bad for me, these are really harmful for me and for my spiritual practice, then that will give you energy to study emptiness, learn emptiness, meditate on it. Really try to work on developing that understanding. And even a certain amount of understanding of emptiness can help us to decrease our afflictions, like desire. For example, if we find a particular object or person very attractive and our mind is getting hung up on that person or that object, it can be helpful to consider how other people see that person or that object, and how they don't see it the same way we do. Some might, yeah, I find that attractive, but others, no, just the opposite. Don't find it attractive at all, don't have desire at all for that object. So that sort of pokes a hole, like a balloon, our mind is like inflated with this feeling of attachment, and oh wow, that object is so wonderful, so fantastic. And hearing that somebody else doesn't find it that way sort of deflates that balloon, deflates that strong feeling of certainty of how wonderful, how fantastic that object is, and how I have to have it. I don't know, that's something that I find. So that's kind of a little bit like emptiness, this in the sense that the way we perceive objects, the way they appear to us, and the way we perceive them and believe in them is not accurate. Things don't exist the way that we perceive them. Because if they did, if that object really was truly inherently wonderful and fantastic as we think it is, everyone else should see it the same way too. That's never the case. So that can help us recognize the role our mind plays in the way the object appears and have less certainty. Like Lama Yeshe used the word concrete view. When we are full of ignorance and attachment and anger, he says it's like concrete view. The objects appear so real and solid and concrete, that really wonderful, or really horrible, or really this, really that. But when we contemplate in this way, how other people see the objects in a different way than we do, it's like softening that concrete view. Things will not appear as concrete and solid as they did before. And we realize, yeah, my mind is playing tricks on me. So we're less likely to buy into it, believe in it. And that will affect our emotion, either attachment or aversion or whatever. Okay, so up to now, I have been talking about the 4 establishments of mindfulness, mainly from the Pali and Theravada tradition, how they are taught, how they are practiced in those traditions. So now I'd like to switch to our tradition, the Tibetan tradition, at least the Gelugpa tradition, how the 4 establishments of mindfulness are explained. So could we have the next slide? So Jetsun Chukyi Gelson was the main textbook writer for Sarah J Monastery, and so he wrote a commentary to the Ornament for Clear Realization, and within that commentary there's a section on the 4 establishments of mindfulness. But I think that the information he's using comes from probably the Indian masters, probably like a Sanga's compendium of Abhidharma, and maybe some other sources as well. So it's not that he just invented this information himself. And in the translation that I have, they use the term close placements of mindfulness. That's actually a pretty exact translation of the Tibetan term. So I hope that's not confusing. Sometimes they're called close placements of mindfulness. Sometimes they're called establishments of mindfulness, foundations of mindfulness. So it's just like different translators will choose different English terms to translate that term. So it's in Pali, it's satipatthana. I don't know what Sanskrit term is. It's probably similar to the Pali. And Tibetan is Drenbe Nirshak. So it is like literally close placement of mindfulness, but establishment of mindfulness is also okay. So he gives a definition of what is the close placement of mindfulness, or the establishment of mindfulness. He says it's an exalted knower of one who has entered a path included within either mindfulness or wisdom that meditates on the 4 bodies, feelings, minds, and phenomena through examining the specific and general characteristics of each of them. It's quite similar to the definition Geshe Yeshe gave us this morning. So the first term is exalted knower, and that term is synonymous with path and ground and clear realizations. So it refers to a particular state of mind, not an ordinary state of mind, but a mind that you would have in somebody who has entered the path. So at least the path of accumulation. And the criteria for entering the path of accumulation in the for hearers and solitary realizers, that's when you have an uncontrived renunciation. So your renunciation of samsara, your wish to be free of samsara, is very strong and arises spontaneously without effort. after having meditated a long time, of course. So when you get to that point, that's when you enter the path of accumulation. And then for bodhisattva, on the bodhisattva path, the path of accumulation starts with uncontrived bodhicitta. So again, having meditated a lot on compassion and love and all the other methods for developing bodhicitta, when it arises spontaneously and effortlessly, that's when you become a bodhisattva and enter the path of accumulation. So we're talking about somebody who's done a lot of practice, a lot of meditation, and reached a pretty high level. So the actual close placement of mindfulness is an exalted knower, is a realization in the mind of someone who's entered the path. And but prior to that, of course, one has to try to generate these practices. So you have to meditate on the 4 establishments of mindfulness, and eventually they become, an actual realization. And then it says it's included within either mindfulness or wisdom. So mindfulness and wisdom are 2 mental factors that are crucial in this kind of practice. So a simple way of explaining this is that mindfulness is the mental factor that keeps your mind focused on the object. So for example, if you're doing close placement of mindfulness on the body, mindfulness keeps your mind focused on the body while you're meditating, so that you're not wandering and thinking about other things. And then wisdom is investigating the body to understand its nature. Is it really as wonderful as it appears to be? Is it permanent? Is it truly existing, and so on? So the wisdom aspect is investigating the body to understand how it really exists, as opposed to how you normally think about it in a deluded way. So this shows that the close placements of mindfulness or establishments of mindfulness are much more than just being in the present. Like a lot of people have this idea that mindfulness means just being in the present, paying attention to whatever is happening moment by moment in a non-judgmental way. So there is that kind of practice, but that's not the meaning of the establishment of mindfulness or the close placement of mindfulness. It is staying present on whatever object you're meditating on, but there needs to be this element of wisdom and investigation. What is that object? How does it actually exist? Does it exist the way it appears, and so on? And then, so it meditates on these four objects as usual, through examining specific and general characteristics. So we'll look at the specific and general characteristics a little bit later, but first let's look at the 4 objects, because the way they're explained in this tradition is somewhat different than in the Pali and Theravada tradition. So if we could have the next slide. Okay, so with regard to the body, the way it's explained in this tradition, there's 3 types of body: inner, outer, and both. So the inner body is explained as the 5 sense powers. So the sense powers are explained to be a very, very subtle kind of matter, physical matter, located within the more gross organs. So for example, the eye sense power, we have an eye sense power that enables us to see objects. And it's not the eyeball that we can see, but it's said to be a subtle matter within the eyeball. So that's the actual sense power. And the same with the ear. So there's this subtle matter within the ear that enables hearing to take place and so on. So the 5 sense powers. And the reason they're called inner, this is the inner body, is because they are associated with our own mind. They enable our sense consciousnesses to perceive objects. So if we didn't have the eye sense power, if it was missing or if it was damaged in some way, we wouldn't be able to have that particular kind of consciousness. We wouldn't be able to see things, have visual consciousness. So because of the important role they play in our ability to perceive the 5 types of objects, then they are called inner. I was looking at a commentary by Geshe Jamba Gyatso, who taught many, many years in Italy, was renowned Geshe. And he said the inner body simply refers to this body that we have, our own body. And that really made sense to me because the sense powers are such subtle phenomena. I mean, how can we actually practice mindfulness of our eye sense power? But yeah, to think of the inner as being this body and practicing mindfulness of that makes sense. And then the outer body are forms that are not bases of sense powers. So that refers to things in the environment, things that we can perceive with our 5 senses. So trees and rocks, buildings, and so on. Things that we can see, sounds that we can hear, odors we can smell, tastes, and tangible things, and so on. So the things, so it's interesting because that's not included in the Pali tradition. In the Pali tradition, mindfulness of the body just refers to this body or others' bodies, but not to things in the environment. And so this is considered body as well, but outer body. Yeah. And then the third is both outer and inner. And this is the 5 sense organs. So that would be like the eyeball, the actual eyeball, or the ear, the gross part of the body that we can see, and is like a container for this sense power. The sense power is something very, very subtle lying within the eyeball and the ear and so on. So those are the gross organs. The eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and the body. The body itself is the tactile sense organ for tactile sensations. And the reason they're called both outer and inner is because they are outer in relation to the sense powers, the very subtle matter. So, compared to the subtle sense power, the sense organ, like the eyeball, is outer. And they are called inner because they are associated with feeling. That's the explanation I got. I think another meaning of inner might be because in relation to external objects, they are inner. And I was kind of wondering about others' bodies. Where do they fit in? Bodies of others. And in Geshe Jamba Gyatso's commentary, he said the bodies of others fit into this third category because they are outer in relation to oneself, and they are inner in relation to themselves. Okay, so like Venerable Pema's body is outer in relation to me, but inner in relation to herself. So it's both outer and inner. There may be different assertions about that, but that's something that made sense to me. So it sounds like then when you're meditating on the body in this tradition, you're meditating not just on your own body, including your sense organs and sense powers, but you're also meditating on all the things in the environment, objects of our five senses, including others' bodies as well. It seems like all physical things, all material things are objects of meditation. Feelings is, as usual, the three types of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. So that's the same as in the Pali tradition. But some of the commentaries also talk about an outer, inner, and both outer and inner with respect to all four of these objects. I'm not going to go into all of that because it just becomes too much information. But yeah, there are also outer, inner, and both aspects of feelings and also minds and phenomena. And then for the third one, minds, this includes the six primary consciousnesses like eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose, tongue, body, and then the mental consciousness. So this is the fifth aggregate of our five aggregates. The fifth aggregate is consciousness aggregate, and that includes all of our six types of consciousness: seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling with our body, and then all of our thoughts and memories and so on. So that's included in mind. And then for the fourth one, phenomena, what's included are, I did mention this already, all mental factors other than feeling, since feeling is already the second object. So all the other mental factors, some which are virtuous, some which are afflictive, some which are neutral. So all the other mental factors. And then permanent phenomena. So that would include like space, mental images, emptinesses, and so on, things that are permanent. And then abstract composites. That's the third type of impermanent phenomena. Things that are neither form nor mind. So it's pretty much saying the fourth object phenomena seems to be whatever exists and isn't in any of the first three categories. All the leftovers, leftover phenomena are in the fourth one. But it seems to be mainly, I'll get to this later, it's mainly the mental factors, especially the afflictive ones and the virtuous ones. Those are the main kind of phenomena one needs to be mindful of. Okay, so now we'll look at the characteristics. So in the definition, it mentioned the general and specific characteristics of the four objects. So that's on the next slide. So we'll start with the general characteristics. These are characteristics of all four objects. So the general characteristics are impermanence, suffering or dukkha, unsatisfactoriness, and then empty and selfless. Okay, so you would meditate on all of the four objects as having these four characteristics. So the body, impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless. Feelings, impermanent, suffering, empty, and selfless, and so on. But strictly speaking, some of these general characteristics would not apply to all instances of the four objects. For example, in the fourth object, phenomena, that included permanent phenomena. So permanent phenomena wouldn't have the first general characteristic of being permanent. And also probably not suffering either. I don't think suffering, dukkha, applies to permanent phenomena. I wouldn't think so. But anyway, most of the other objects, body, feelings, and so on, these 4 characteristics do apply to them. But also, yeah, another thing is feelings. When we talk about feelings, these 4 characteristics, well, most of them would apply, because among feelings, some feelings are contaminated and some are uncontaminated. So for us ordinary beings, our feelings are contaminated. They're contaminated by afflictions and karma. But there are feelings in the minds of Buddhas and Arhats, and those are uncontaminated feelings. And so they're impermanent. Impermanence still applies to them, but not suffering. They wouldn't be suffering. They wouldn't be unsatisfactory. They would still be empty and selfless, though. So anyway, these are the general characteristics of most of the 4 types of objects. And then for the last 2 of the general characteristics, empty and selfless, those are explained in different ways by different schools. Prasangika, the Prasangika school would say both empty and selfless mean empty of inherent existence. That's how they interpret empty and selfless. But since they're the only school that refutes inherent existence, and all the other schools believe in inherent existence, if we want to be inclusive and not push out the other Buddhist schools, then a way of explaining empty and selfless that includes all the schools of philosophy, then you would say empty means empty of a permanent, unitary, independent self. There's no that kind of self that the non-Buddhists believe in. And selfless means the emptiness of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self. So if we explain empty and selfless in that way, then all the Buddhist schools would come on board, would agree with that. So those are the general characteristics. So you meditate on the 4 objects, minds, feelings, body, feelings, mind, and phenomena, looking at how they have those 4 characteristics. And then each of the 4 objects has specific characteristics. And by meditating on the specific characteristics, you connect with the 4 truths. So there's a way of correlating each of the 4 objects with one of the 4 truths. Okay, so the first is the body, and the specific characteristic of the body is the impurity of the body. And so here you would meditate on the parts of the body, like blood, bones, and so on, as in the Pali tradition, but also on how the body will become a corpse one day, and will degenerate, decompose, become all smelly, and so on. So meditating on the impurity of the body involves that, thinking about what it's made of, the parts of the body, and how none of them are really beautiful and wonderful and pure. And then how, what happens to a body after it dies, decomposes, and thinking that's going to happen to my body. That's the nature of my body. So if we investigate the body in this way, then we can't find anything that's pure and clean in the body. And so by doing this meditation, then one comes to understand the first noble truth, true suffering. So I have a commentary Geshe Rabten gave. Geshe Rabten was a wonderful teacher who lived in Switzerland. And it's kind of funny. I have this transcript of commentary he gave. It was probably a weekend course given in Switzerland. And when he started talking about the body, he said, some of you might want to listen to this, so you can close your ears. But he went on and talked about it anyway. And so in his commentary, he said, with regard to this, he said, the body should be understood to be something that by nature is unsatisfactory. This is so because it readily gives rise to pain upon encountering even the slightest unfavorable condition. So our body is unsatisfactory and vulnerable. That's my word, vulnerable to pain and suffering. And so contemplating in the body helps us understand the first truth, true suffering. Then with the second object is feelings, and the specific characteristic is suffering, the suffering nature of feelings. So why are feelings in the nature of suffering? Somebody answer. They cause afflictions to arise. Yes. So as we learned before, pleasant feelings usually lead to attachment, desire. Unpleasant feelings usually lead to aversion, anger. And then neutral feelings just perpetuate our ignorance about the way things exist. Yeah, so they lead to and perpetuate our afflictions, especially the three poisons. And then that in turn can lead to karma, engaging in actions that sometimes are non-virtuous and lead to even further suffering in the future. So they keep us stuck in samsara. So Geshe Rabten said, through considering that feelings give rise to attachment and hatred, which are important factors in the origin of suffering, then we are led to realize the second noble truth. So meditating on the suffering nature of feelings will help us understand the second truth, origin of suffering. Then with the third object is the mind. We meditate on the impermanence of the mind. So, I mean, all four objects are impermanent, but I guess the reason for specifically meditating on the impermanence of the mind, Geshe Rabten said, we have the tendency to consider the mind as something very powerful and essential that stands 100% for the personal identity. We innately conceive the mind as the actual nature of the self, so we identify ourselves with our mind. But through this practice, we can dispel this conception by realizing the mind to be something fleeting and unstable. So when we really investigate the mind, we can see how it's impermanent. You know, each moment of mind arises and passes. There's nothing permanent, fixed in the mind. And so we will realize there's no such strongly existing mind that we can point to. On discovering this essenceless nature of mind, we shall realize the mistaken quality of clinging to it as an inherent personal identity. And in this way, we shall be led to the aspiration to fully comprehend the lack of personal identity and thus achieving true cessation, the third noble truth. So meditating on the impermanence of the mind connects us with the third truth, the cessation of suffering. Realizing, basically what he's saying is, if we really carefully look at the mind, we'll see there's nothing, strong and permanent fixed there that we can point to as being the I, as being the self. So we realize, there's no self in the mind, and that will lead us to want to achieve the cessation of suffering by understanding emptiness, the lack of a fixed permanent self or I. Then the selflessness of, okay, so the fourth object is phenomena, and the specific characteristic is selflessness. So Geshe Rabten says, so this practice refers to cultivating mindfulness of the wholesome and unwholesome mental factors. So the most important phenomena to meditate on are the mental factors, especially the virtuous ones and the afflictive ones. He says, understanding the mind to not be the self, we shall automatically comprehend that there are no inherently existing objects like the mental factors to be accepted or rejected by an independently existing self. So normally we look at the mental factors and understand that some of them are not like afflictive and non-virtuous, and these are things we want to get rid of, like anger, attachment, jealousy, arrogance. So those are the things we want to abandon, get rid of. Then there's other mental factors that are virtuous, like faith and compassion and love, non-attachment. Those are the ones we want to cultivate, we want to practice. So conventionally that is the case, but he's saying that we understand that they don't exist inherently, independently, and also there's no inherently independently existing I who is doing this work of rejecting some and adopting others. So he says, becoming mindful of such mental factors in this way thus leads us to the various practices by which the wholesome mental factors are cultivated and the unwholesome ones are overcome. Therefore, we can see how close placement of mindfulness on phenomena leads us to the fourth truth of the path. So could you, Paula, could you skip not the next one, but the second one down? There's a chart I made that kind of puts together. It's nice to have a chart. So this kind of combines these things that we just went through, how they work together. And this is based on a chart in the book, Following the Buddha's Footsteps. So the first column are the objects of mindfulness. So with the body, the misconception regarding that is that the body is pure. And the specific characteristic we need to meditate on is that it's impure. Body is impure or unclean or foul. There's different ways of stating that, but that will overcome the misconception of the body being pure. And then the last column is the truth, which of the four noble truths or Arya truths we connect with or understand or gain insight into. So that's the first truth, true dukkha. And then the second object, feelings, the misconception we have is that they are happiness, they are satisfying, they're wonderful, fantastic. But we need to meditate on the specific characteristic that that's not the case. They are suffering, they're dukkha. And if you remember previously, we talked about how the three types of feelings are actually the three types of suffering. Suffering of painful feelings are the suffering of suffering. Pleasant feelings are suffering of change. Neutral feelings are the third type of suffering, pervasive suffering. So all three types of feelings are actually suffering or unsatisfactory. So then contemplating that, meditating on that will lead to the second truth, understanding that, true origins. And then third object is mind. The misconception is that it's permanent, a permanent mind. So we need to meditate on impermanence. That's the specific characteristic. And that will lead to the third truth, true cessation. And then the fourth object is phenomena, mainly the mental factors. And the misconception we have is that there is a self, that there's some kind of permanent self or substantially existent self. So the specific characteristic to meditate on with phenomena is selflessness. There's no such permanent fixed self. That will lead to the fourth truth of true paths. So there's actually a bit more to say about this, and I'll do that next week, but we're getting short of time, so I wanted to, and you're probably very tired as well. There's a lot of a lot of information tonight. So I'll just finish talking about a few more things next week. And then also I need to start moving on to, so far we've only been talking about the first set of the 37 harmonies, and there's 6 more sets to go. I'll cover them quickly, but this first set, the 4 establishments of mindfulness, is very, very important, as His Holiness said, so I did want to spend more time on that. So we'll just kind of briefly look at the remainders, the remaining sets of the 37 harmonies. So there's a little bit of time left if anyone has a question.
Does an actual close placement of mindfulness and also the path consciousnesses require a certain level of concentration?
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, like if you're following the Bodhisattva path, the starting point of the path of accumulation is uncontrived bodhicitta. So when your bodhicitta arises naturally and spontaneously, effortlessly, that's when you enter that path. And prior to that, it said that to develop bodhicitta, to develop uncontrived bodhicitta, you have to have already developed calm abiding. So you already have calm abiding as a prerequisite. I don't know if the same is true for the hearer's path, solitary realizer's path. If they need to have calm abiding before they can have uncontrived renunciation. But you'd probably have to have pretty good concentration to be able to focus your mind on objects and see them as they are, see them correctly, so that you can generate those realizations. Yeah, so actually in Vasubandhu's text, the Abhidharmakosha, what's it called? Treasury of Knowledge. He explains calm abiding first, followed by the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And I don't remember exactly the wording, but I think it's pretty much stated that you do have to generate calm abiding first, and then you practice. I don't think that means you can't practice the 4 establishments until you have calm abiding. I think you can certainly practice them, but you won't be able to actually achieve them or realize them without calm abiding. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, to really get the insights, the whole purpose is to get insight into how the body is impermanent and so on. So you need pretty strong concentration to be able to do that. So again, we need to recognize those 5 hindrances to concentration and work on counteracting them. Any other questions? Anyone online have a question?
So, if I read this correctly, the Geshe Rabten quote about the selflessness of phenomena, he said, understanding the mind to not be the self, we will automatically comprehend that there are no inherently existent objects, like the mental factors, to be rejected by an inherently existent self. From what I recall, the way you realize the selflessness of the self is first by seeing the selflessness of the aggregates. But here it sounds like you're seeing that the mind, well, I guess that's one aggregate. And then, yeah, if you identify the mind with the self, it's sort of like seeing that the self is selfless, and then you infer the objects are selfless, as opposed to objects are selfless, then therefore the self must be selfless.
Well, I mean, normally, not talking about this set of teachings, but like in the Lam Rim or in teachings on emptiness, they say that all phenomena are empty. Emptiness is an attribute, a quality of all phenomena. But when it comes to first exploring emptiness and getting an understanding of emptiness, we are encouraged to start with our own sense of self or I, and investigate how we see ourselves and try to understand that as empty. We do that before the aggregates, before looking at the aggregates. I mean, they say it's more difficult to understand emptiness of aggregates than it is to understand the emptiness of the self or the I. I know many people have trouble understanding that, but that's what they say. That's what all the great masters in Tibet and India, they say, yeah, start with your own I, your own self. So that's what I've always heard, that you first explore the I and then look at the aggregates. So there could be other ways of explaining it, other ways of understanding emptiness. But yeah, that seems to be the pattern here. Like with the fourth, you're looking at the mind. The third of the four objects is the mind, which we tend to identify ourselves with. Feeling, I am my mind, that which thinks and feels and knows, that's me. So when we understand more clearly what the mind is all about and how it's impermanent and essenceless, we can't find anything in the mind we can point to as being the I or the self. That seems to be what he's saying here. Then that will help us understand emptiness of the self. And then after that, go on to look at the mental factors, and that they too are empty. I kind of rushed through this a little quickly, and there was a little bit more that I'll take care of next week. Might clear this up. So there's a lot of material on the four establishments of mindfulness. In fact, I was thinking you could probably spend a whole year or maybe 2 years just going through all these details and also learning how to meditate on them. We haven't had that much chance to do the different meditations on them. But in this course, we have limited time and we still have the rest of the 37 harmonies to go through, so we'll have to move on to that quickly. But on one's own, on your own, you can do more study and more practice of these four establishments of mindfulness. So let's finish by dedicating the merit, the positive energy we've accumulated. So feel a sense of joy, rejoicing that we did spend this time looking at this very precious topic taught by the Buddha, practiced by practitioners of all traditions for their attainment of liberation and enlightenment. So we're really fortunate that we have the chance to at least learn these teachings and get imprints on our minds and start making little baby steps into the practice of them. So feel good about having done this, and that we did definitely create some merit by listening to these teachings with an altruistic intention. So let's share this merit with all other sentient beings, wishing it will be the cause for all of us to gain all the realizations we need to progress along the path and finally reach enlightenment. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Incomparably kind and supreme Tenzin Gyatso, the wish-fulfilling, wish-granting jewel, source of every benefit and happiness in this world, may you have a long life and all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three sublime ones, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Thank you. Thank you, Paula, for hosting. Thank everyone for joining.
Wonderful.